Every day, millions of people walk into hospitals believing the system exists for one reason only: to make them healthy again. Doctors save lives, nurses care for patients, ambulances arrive at all hours of the night. From the outside, hospitals look like places built entirely around human survival. But behind the scenes, another system quietly controls almost everything: money. Modern hospitals are not just healthcare institutions anymore. In many countries, they operate like giant corporations managing billions of dollars every year. Every broken bone, every surgery, every overnight stay, and every medical procedure has a financial value attached to it. Entire departments exist not only to treat patients, but also to calculate how much money each patient generates. And that creates a dangerous question. What happens when saving money becomes just as important as saving lives? Across Germany, hospitals are facing growing financial pressure. Many are operating at massive losses. Some are reducing staff. Others are shutting down entire departments or closing completely. At the same time, workers inside the healthcare system are quietly warning that financial incentives are starting to influence medical decisions in ways most patients never notice. Behind the language of healthcare reform and efficiency hides a system so complex that most people never fully understand how hospitals actually make money. But once you see how it works, it becomes impossible to look at modern healthcare the same way again. Because in today's hospital system, illness is not only a medical problem, it is also a business model. Most people never think about what happens financially after entering a hospital. A patient arrives with a broken foot, chest pain, or severe illness, receives treatment, and eventually leaves. The entire process feels focused entirely on healthcare. But behind every surgery, hospital bed, and medical procedure, enormous amounts of money are constantly moving between hospitals, insurance companies, and governments. In Germany alone, there are nearly 1,900 hospitals, and many of them generate tens or even hundreds of millions of euros every year. Some of the largest hospital groups operate like giant corporations with thousands of employees, massive budgets, and complicated financial systems. But despite the huge amounts of money flowing through healthcare, many hospitals are struggling financially. According to recent reports, nearly 2/3 of German hospitals are operating at a loss. Some lose over 100 million euros per year. Others are forced to reduce staff, close departments, or shut down entirely. Since 1990, the total number of hospitals in Germany has dropped by roughly 25%, even as demand for healthcare continues increasing. That creates a massive contradiction. If hospitals receive billions of euros every year, why are so many constantly running out of money? The answer begins with something called the DRG system, short for diagnosis-related groups. This system completely changed how hospitals earn money. Instead of charging separately for every bandage, medicine, or hospital stay, hospitals now receive fixed payments depending on the diagnosis and treatment category assigned to the patient. For example, if someone arrives with a broken foot requiring surgery, the hospital does not simply bill every individual cost separately. Instead, the patient is placed into a predefined treatment category with a fixed financial value attached to it. That means hospitals already know approximately how much money they will receive before treatment is even completed. At first glance, the system sounds efficient. Similar medical cases are grouped together under standardized payments to prevent hospitals from charging unlimited prices. Insurance companies benefit because costs become predictable. Governments benefit because spending becomes easier to control. But the system also creates something extremely dangerous. Once hospitals receive fixed payments, profit depends heavily on reducing costs. If the hospital can treat a patient for less money than the fixed payment provides, the hospital keeps the difference. But if treatment becomes more expensive than expected, the hospital loses money. Suddenly, every patient becomes connected to financial calculations. Shorter hospital stays become financially attractive. Staffing costs become targets for reduction. Expensive treatments become potential financial risks. And highly profitable procedures start becoming more desirable than less profitable ones. Workers inside healthcare systems say this financial pressure has transformed hospitals in ways most patients never see. Departments constantly analyze efficiency. Administrators study which treatments generate profits and which create losses. Entire business strategies now exist inside institutions that were originally designed primarily for patient care. And once healthcare starts operating under business logic, the line between treating patients and managing revenue begins becoming much harder to separate. To understand how modern hospitals really make money, you first have to understand how strangely mechanical the system has become. Inside the DRG system, patients are no longer viewed only as individuals needing treatment. Financially, they are sorted into categories, codes, and predefined payment groups that determine how much money the hospital will receive. Every diagnosis receives a specific code. A broken foot, a heart operation, a spinal surgery, or a birth complication all belong to different financial classifications. These codes calculate what hospitals are expected to earn for treating that specific medical case. Imagine a patient arriving with a fractured foot that requires surgery. Instead of billing every individual medical action separately, the hospital assigns the patient to a predefined treatment category. In Germany, one example would be a code similar to I20C, a category connected to foot surgery without major complications. That code already contains an expected financial value. The amount hospitals receive depends on a formula tied to regional base payment rates. In some German states, the same operation may generate slightly more money than in others. A relatively standard foot surgery can bring hospitals roughly €5,000 before additional adjustments are included. At first, that might sound reasonable, but the deeper you look into the system, the stranger it becomes. The hospital does not automatically earn more money simply because a patient stays longer. In fact, hospitals often receive nearly the same payment whether a patient stays for 2 days or 12 days. That creates a major financial incentive. The faster the patient leaves, the lower the hospital's costs become. Hospital stays themselves are carefully regulated financially. There are minimum stay requirements, and if a patient leaves too early, hospitals may actually lose part of the payment. But if patients remain too long, hospitals often receive only very limited additional compensation compared to the rising costs of care. That creates enormous pressure to optimize time. Workers inside healthcare systems say hospitals constantly monitor patient flow because every extra day inside the hospital increases expenses without generating significant new revenue. Beds must move quickly, patients must rotate efficiently, delays become financial problems. At the same time, hospitals carefully analyze which treatments are profitable and which are not. Procedures requiring expensive equipment, specialized staff, or long recovery times can become financial risks under fixed payment systems. More standardized surgeries, however, often generate predictable income more efficiently. Critics argue this gradually changes medical priorities. Instead of focusing entirely on patient need, hospitals begin thinking, like businesses optimizing revenue streams. Departments study which operations generate stable profits. Administrators pressure staff to improve efficiency metrics. Financial performance becomes deeply connected to medical decision-making. Most patients never notice any of this. They see doctors, nurses, surgeries, and hospital rooms. But behind the scenes, entire financial systems constantly calculate how valuable every treatment is. And once human health becomes organized into profitable and unprofitable categories, healthcare slowly begins operating less like public service and more like industrial management. The biggest problem with hospital payment systems is not simply that hospitals need money to survive. Every healthcare system requires funding, equipment, buildings, and staff. The real danger appears when financial incentives begin influencing medical decisions in ways patients never fully realize. Inside the DRG system, hospitals earn fixed payments for specific treatments. That means profits depend heavily on controlling costs while maximizing revenue. And once that logic enters healthcare, extremely uncomfortable incentives begin appearing. One of the clearest examples involves patient stay duration. Because hospitals often receive nearly the same payment whether someone stays for a short period or much longer, shorter stays become financially attractive. Every additional day inside the hospital increases staffing, food, equipment, and operational costs. From a business perspective, moving patients out faster improves efficiency. Critics argue this creates pressure to discharge patients earlier whenever possible. Hospital workers insist medical decisions are still made primarily for patient safety, but many acknowledge the financial pressure exists constantly in the background. Staffing became another major target for cost reduction. For years, many hospitals attempted to reduce expenses by decreasing the number of nurses and caregivers. If fewer staff members could manage more patients, hospitals could lower operational costs while still receiving the same fixed payments for treatments. Over time, that strategy created severe staffing shortages across parts of the healthcare system. Nurses described exhausting workloads, burnout, and increasing pressure as hospitals attempted to maintain financial stability while operating with fewer employees. But some incentives inside the system became even more disturbing. Certain treatments generate significantly higher revenues than others. Highly specialized surgeries, long intensive care treatments, and complex medical procedures can bring hospitals much larger payments. Critics warn this creates subtle pressure to prioritize financially attractive procedures over less profitable forms of care. One controversial example involved mechanical ventilation. Under parts of the payment system, hospitals could receive significantly different compensation depending on how long patients remained on ventilators. Crossing certain time thresholds sometimes resulted in much larger payments. That creates an ethical nightmare. From a medical perspective, patients should remain on ventilators only as long as absolutely necessary. But financially, keeping someone ventilated slightly longer could potentially generate more revenue. Even if most doctors act ethically, critics argue the system should never create situations where financial incentives and patient interests risk colliding at all. Perhaps the most shocking scandal connected to financial incentives happened in 2013 at the University Medical Center Göttingen in Germany. Prosecutors accused a transplant surgeon of manipulating patient data so certain individuals appeared more severely ill than they actually were. By changing medical information, patients allegedly moved higher on organ transplant waiting lists. The case triggered national outrage because organ allocation is supposed to depend entirely on medical urgency, not financial pressure or institutional performance. Public trust in organ donation dropped sharply after the scandal became public. Although many healthcare workers strongly rejected such behavior, the scandal exposed something deeply uncomfortable. Once financial rewards become connected to medical outcomes, even life and death systems can become vulnerable to manipulation. And for many critics, that raises the most disturbing question of all. If hospitals must constantly balance patient care against financial survival, how long before business logic begins shaping medicine more than medicine itself? At first glance, hospitals should be financially stable. They receive billions in public funding, process enormous numbers of patients every year, and operate inside one of the most important industries in society. But despite all of that, many hospitals are drowning in debt and struggling to survive. One major reason is that the system itself was never designed to generate massive profits from ordinary treatment alone. The fixed payments inside the DRG system are primarily intended to cover operational costs, not necessarily long-term investments, modernization, or expansion. That creates a huge problem. Hospitals require extremely expensive infrastructure. Buildings must be maintained. Medical technology constantly becomes more advanced. Equipment must be replaced. Intensive care units, operating rooms, scanners, emergency departments, and digital systems all require enormous investment just to remain functional. In theory, part of these investment costs should be covered by the government. In Germany, this model is known as dual financing. The state is supposed to support large infrastructure investments, while hospitals cover day-to-day operations through patient treatment payments. But critics argue the system no longer functions properly. Economic research groups have repeatedly warned that German states are investing far less money into hospitals than experts believe is necessary. Some studies estimate hospitals require investment levels equal to roughly 8% of their annual revenue, just to remain modern and competitive. In reality, many regions reportedly provide only about half of that amount. As a result, hospitals increasingly attempt to fill financial gaps themselves. And because ordinary treatment payments are often limited, hospitals begin searching for other ways to generate additional revenue. Administrators pressure departments to operate more efficiently. Highly profitable procedures receive more focus. Medical coding departments grow increasingly important because even small classification differences can change how much money hospitals receive. This gave rise to entire teams dedicated to something called medical controlling specialists, who analyze diagnoses, documentation, and billing categories to maximize hospital revenue legally within the system. In many cases, this work simply ensures hospitals receive correct payment for the services they actually provide. But critics argue the complexity of the system creates gray areas, where hospitals may feel tempted to classify treatments in ways that increase revenue whenever possible. Investigations by German media organizations, including reports connected to WDR and Der Spiegel, have periodically raised concerns about hospitals exaggerating diagnoses or selecting more financially beneficial billing categories. Hospitals strongly reject many accusations, arguing the system itself is extremely complicated and open to interpretation. Still, the financial pressure continues growing. Smaller hospitals struggle especially hard because they cannot compete as efficiently as giant hospital networks. Rural hospitals often face severe funding shortages while still needing to maintain emergency services for local populations. Many eventually reduce departments or close completely because operating losses become impossible to sustain. Workers inside healthcare systems say this creates a dangerous cycle. Staff shortages increase pressure on remaining employees. Burnout rises, service quality suffers, patients become frustrated, financial problems grow even worse, and while politicians continue debating healthcare reforms, hospitals remain trapped inside a system where survival increasingly depends not only on treating patients well, but also on mastering the financial game hidden behind modern medicine. The deeper people look into modern hospital systems, the more uncomfortable the reality becomes. Hospitals were originally built around one core purpose: helping sick people recover. But over time, financial survival has become so important that many critics now believe healthcare increasingly operates like a business industry rather than a purely human service. This creates a fundamental conflict. On one side, hospitals must function economically. Buildings, salaries, equipment, and medicine cost enormous amounts of money. Without financial stability, hospitals cannot survive at all. But on the other side, healthcare is not the same as selling cars, electronics, or luxury products. Human lives are involved, and many people believe profit should never become too closely connected to medical decision-making. Workers inside healthcare systems often describe feeling trapped between these two realities. Doctors and nurses enter medicine to help people, yet many increasingly work inside environments dominated by efficiency targets, staffing calculations, and financial pressure. Entire hospital departments are evaluated not only by patient outcomes, but also by economic performance. Critics argue this slowly changes how hospitals think. Procedures that generate stable revenue become extremely valuable. Departments that lose money face cuts or closures. Administrators pressure hospitals to operate more efficiently every year, even while patient demand continues increasing. In some cases, workers say hospitals behave less like care institutions and more like giant corporations trying to survive inside an increasingly competitive market. The psychological effect on healthcare workers can be devastating. Nurses describe exhaustion from caring for too many patients at once. Doctors complain about spending increasing amounts of time on documentation, billing codes, and administrative requirements rather than direct patient care. Many workers feel they are constantly balancing medical ethics against institutional financial realities. Patients often feel the consequences without fully understanding the cause. Waiting times grow longer, appointments become shorter, staff appear overwhelmed. Smaller hospitals disappear entirely, forcing patients to travel farther for treatment. At the same time, healthcare costs continue rising despite all the efficiency reforms designed to reduce spending. And perhaps most troubling of all, public trust slowly begins weakening. Scandals involving billing manipulation, financial incentives, or unethical hospital behavior damage confidence in the system itself. Even if most healthcare workers act responsibly and ethically, many people become uncomfortable knowing hospitals constantly operate under financial pressure while making life and death decisions. The reality is that modern healthcare systems are incredibly complicated. Completely removing financial structures could create massive inefficiency and waste. But allowing financial incentives to dominate medicine creates dangers that many experts believe society still has not solved properly. Because healthcare is fundamentally different from almost every other industry. A hospital patient is not a normal customer. Someone arriving in an emergency room usually has no ability to compare prices, negotiate costs, or delay decisions. Patients are vulnerable, frightened, and dependent on the system protecting them fairly. And once hospitals begin viewing human illness too heavily through the lens of revenue, the line between healing people and managing profit starts becoming dangerously blurred. Modern hospitals save millions of lives every year. Doctors perform extraordinary surgeries. Nurses work through exhaustion to care for patients. Emergency rooms operate day and night under enormous pressure. None of that changes the fact that healthcare workers remain some of the most important people in society. But behind all of that human effort exists another reality that most patients never fully see. Hospitals today operate inside financial systems so massive and complicated that medicine and economics have become deeply connected. Every diagnosis carries a price. Every treatment belongs to a category. Every hospital stay affects budgets, staffing, and revenue calculations happening quietly in the background. And as financial pressure continues growing, hospitals are increasingly forced to think not only about saving lives, but also about surviving economically themselves. That creates a dangerous balancing act. If hospitals ignore finances completely, entire systems collapse under debt and inefficiency. But if financial incentives become too powerful, healthcare slowly begins transforming into something colder and more mechanical. Patients risk becoming numbers. Treatments risk becoming business decisions. And trust in the healthcare system itself begins weakening. The frightening part is that most people never notice any of this until they become patients themselves. Only then do they discover how complicated, expensive, and financially driven modern medicine has truly become behind the scenes. And while governments, hospitals, and insurance systems continue debating reforms, millions of healthcare workers remain trapped inside a structure that constantly forces medicine and money to collide. Because in the end, the biggest question is no longer whether hospitals need money to function. The real question is how far society is willing to let business logic shape the future of human healthcare.